All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're a minute after, and I have a lot of content to cover today, so let's just jump right into it. A few housekeeping items. Everybody's lines are muted today, just to kind of prevent some of that background noise. And if you have any questions throughout the entire presentation today, whether it's the demo portion or the slide portion, please feel free to drop them in our Q&A. We'll hopefully have time to get to them today, but if not, I will make sure that we answer all of them and get those sent out as well as with the slideshow and the recordings, and then any kind of resources that we're going to be sharing today. So again, my name is Emily Walker. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am one of our solutions consultants here at ServiceNow, specializing in our IT operations management, or ITOM platform. I previously come from more of that traditional IT background, working in a corporate environment. And so I have a lot of experience understanding really how critical discovery and service mapping can be for your teams. So I'm excited to share that with you today. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and flip off my video because I really want you to focus on all of this great content. So let's get started. This first slide here is our safe harbor notice. So today's session may contain some forward-looking statements, but most likely not, since we're going to be covering everything that's currently released. So today we'll look at three main areas. The value, these are like the three, and then also the three different approaches to service mapping, and then some best practices and some resources to help you in your implementation. Here's our agenda that we're going to be covering. First, we'll start with the overview of service mapping and service mapping approaches. Next up, we'll look at the training path, and then we'll really dive into how those three approaches are configured in my demo instance. And then finally, we'll finish up with some takeaways and additional resources. I have a poll, and I'm going to launch this. And so it's really kind of to understand, where are you at in your service mapping journey? And so maybe you haven't even started. Maybe you're here to learn more about service mapping. Maybe you're still deciding if ServiceNow service mapping is the right fit. Maybe you already have service mapping, but you're having a little bit of a hard time getting started. Or maybe you're full steam ahead and you're just here to see if there are any new things, or just gain some more knowledge. So if you choose one, that would be great, kind of get an idea of where everybody's at. So the next one, I have one more poll, and then we won't see any more polls until the end of the call. But this next one is really, what's the value? So what do you think the value and the benefit are with service mapping? And I'll launch this. So what are some of the benefits here? Preventing outages, improving the change and incident process, insight into affected application services. And then there's some other ones, some of these better together stories when we pair them with health, being able to see the health of those services. When we pair it with SecOps, being able to see the vulnerabilities there. And then also I added a last one that I thought was kind of funny, avoiding that deer in the headlights look of, how did this happen to this particular service? And then even worse, needing to update your resume on LinkedIn. So yeah, all of them, exactly. Service mapping is really there to help prevent outages, improve that change and incident process, helps to give insight to those affected business services. And then it also pairs well with a few of our other products, giving it that better together story for ITOM Health and SecOps, further insights and actions. And so looking at this next slide from right to left, looking at all of these items in our infrastructure, whether that's our on-prem or cloud, our container infrastructure, or even things like logs and metrics, all of these critical data sources, and we're pulling all of these into our service-aware CMDB. And hopefully we're pulling all of this in an automated way through discovery or through our service graph connectors for those configuration items and event management for our events and alerts here. And I think I can click a couple times. There we go. And so here under service oriented, you see our CSDM, and our that's a kind of a mouthful. Our CSDM data model is our common services data model, and it's the CMDB framework that really supports multiple configuration strategies. And so the data model includes guidelines for the base system tables and relationships. And many of these ServiceNow products depend on data within the CMDB. And so having this data model to structure it can really be of value. And so once we have our CMDB populated, our service aware CMDB populated, we're able to take advantage of all of these siloed components and that data that's so critical for the different teams to use and make it really service focused within that service aware CMDB. So ultimately, from the ITSM perspective, this is giving those incident management teams, change management teams visibility. Once we have our maps published and operational, they're going to see menus like the one that we see here in this graphic, showing them exactly what changes are open or what incidents are open. So it's really helping to give those teams that single pane of glass when it comes to ITSM at the service level. Another use case we hear a lot for our customers is being able to see that impact analysis. So being able to see what other applications are impacted when there's an incident on a particular configuration item within that application service is so valuable. Your teams are able to end up being more proactive, less reactive. They're able to manage operations more effectively when you can see all of those related business services based on dependencies. And so let's jump into the 3 types of approaches to service mapping. And I know that I said 3, I definitely can count, but how we do this is we kind of group 1 and 2 together under what we refer to as top-down mapping. So we're really talking here about using that pattern-based and traffic-based mapping together in conjunction. And we like to call them our top-down duo. And then next we have our tag-based mapping, which is really used for our cloud and container resources. And then last, we have our machine learning based approach. And the innovations that we've really made here over the last few releases have been really great. And so we'll look at each of these in more detail and how they work in our demo instance. And so diving a bit deeper into each one of these approaches, one thing to point out before we kind of get into that is that these various approaches can be used in combination for what works best for your specific application services within your company. So maybe you have a mix of on-prem and cloud and container. You can absolutely use multiple approaches. You can use top-down and you can use tag-based. It's really up to you for what works best. So first, let's take a look at top-down discovery. And top-down discovery is more of this traditional method of collecting data about devices and applications that are used in application services. So top-down mapping is also traditionally used for those on-prem again and legacy applications, and really has the benefit of giving us the most accurate and detailed service maps. And then with tag-based mapping, again, this is more for your cloud and container applications that you may have running. And a tag is really just that label that consists of a key pair value, and your organization may use tags to categorize and to enhance query and reporting capabilities. And so once tags are discovered, service mapping can create application services based on these tags. And again, typically organizations that are using tagging are these virtualized, hyper-converged multi-cloud infrastructures. And then last here we have machine learning. And this is where service mapping uses data processed by predictive intelligence to generate suggestions for traffic-based connections. And with this approach, this is really where we're seeing the fastest time to value, because machine learning evaluates connections based between application fingerprints, CIs, and processes, and then ranks their relevancy. And then service mapping uses this information to create those connections based on those connection rules. And it also generates connection suggestions for you to decide which connections to either add or remove from application services. And again, we'll see all of this in my demo. I'm going to take a super quick pause because I saw a question come in. We've been trying to find a detailed documentation on top-down application patterns for apps like Epic, PeopleSoft, and many more. Where can we find detailed documentation on these patterns? Yeah, the best place to look is on our product documentation site, and I can put that in the chat here or put it in our resources. I think it might actually be in here. I'm not sure if these are too out of the box. I think out of the box we have about 900 different patterns, but we'll also talk about ways if using machine learning, how if there isn't a specific pattern defined, how we can use machine learning to still create that service map without that pattern. So we'll talk more about that shortly. All right. I think I saw one more come in. Oh, nope, documentation. Okay. Yeah, let me take that as a takeaway and I will get back to you on that one, Sufin. Okay, let's keep going. So we're going to walk through when each of these would most likely be used. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is pattern-based mapping. So here we have our partner one in our top-down duo. And this is really our bread and butter here. So patterns are essentially these series of steps that run during discovery, whose purpose is to go out and find all the attributes of a configuration item and its outbound connections. So as discovery is going out to map an application, the pattern is telling it, here are the attributes and the connection points I want you to look for. And from there, build me a map. So as discovery is running, we're able to see in the logs specifically what patterns are being launched automatically and how discovery is getting its instructions for how to map these CIs and identify the relationships between them automatically. A typical service mapping pattern consists of separate algorithms for identifying CIs and then finding those CI connections. So you can think of this as casting a wide net to pull in all of those CIs that are relevant to those applications. And the difference between this approach and the others is really the upfront time it takes to set up because it's dependent on horizontal discovery. So this requires configuring credentials, users, and user permissions to let service mapping access applications inside your company's private network. And so this process, we see this is kind of where it takes the most time and effort. And sometimes this can be seen as a disadvantage, but it's really important to look at the major benefit here. And that's with pattern-based mapping, we're able to get this really precise and complete application service map. And when you have that, that's data that you can actually fully trust, and that becomes invaluable. So the next one we have is traffic-based mapping, which is our other partner in this top-down duo. And traffic-based mapping discovers and maps configuration items following their traffic-based connection. And this method complements that pattern-based approach. That's why we call them our top-down duo. And so traffic-based connections look for how those CIs are talking to one another, what traffic is flowing between them, the TCP connections, what it's connecting to, and what it's listening on. And then it's creating these maps using that data. So with traffic, we're getting more specific about what connections we have to CIs. With pattern-based mapping, that's more of that wider, that wider net that we're casting, where we're pulling in as much information as we can. But with traffic, we're getting more granular. We're using that finer net to see what traffic connections dictate those relationships. And the other great way that traffic helps to complement pattern-based mapping is when discovery patterns fail to find CIs. So this kind of goes back to that other, if there isn't a pre-built pattern, when we're doing top-down discovery, we can also look at the traffic to help us build out that map. So while using traffic-based discovery creates more of this inclusive map, it also, the kind of negative side to this is that it also may map redundant CIs that don't really influence this application service. So it ends up sometimes, can potentially clutter an application service with irrelevant. So because of this, the best practice that we recommend is once you use traffic-based discovery in that initial stage, that's really the best place to use it when you're discovering an application service, and then disabling it once we've completed discovery and we're just fine-tuning that application service. But again, the great advantage here for top-down mapping discovery is that it works hand in hand to provide you with the most precise and complete service maps. So tag-based. So basically, As horizontal discovery is running and pulling in tag data from those cloud resources. Again, we're just using normal horizontal discovery here, but it's going and discovering those cloud CIs and it's pulling any tag data in at the same time. So we'll see that in my demo that I've assigned tags. I have an AWS instance and I've assigned tags within that instance and tag values to my different VMs. And so it's going to be pulling in those tag attributes just like it would any different attribute for that cloud resource. So it's automatically going to pull that cloud or container data when discovery is running. And then once you have this tag data pulled into our CMDB, ServiceNow is going to use that tag data to map these services. And so this is where you can use this to map multiple applications that are pulled in, and we'll see that shortly here in my demo instance. One thing to note with tag-based mapping is that your teams really do need to have tag governance and tagging policies already defined, because if your tags are kind of assigned in this miscellaneous random way, then it's going to be really hard to map these resources correctly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's kind of the one gotcha, is that you really need to have a good tagging policy and tag governance, so that when these maps, so then when it maps with this data, we're making sure that it's pulling in the correct data. All right, and then the last one that we're going to talk about, I see some questions coming in, so I'll get to those as soon as I finish up this one. And so the last approach that we're talking about here is machine learning mapping. And so basically how this works, Discovery is pulling in so much data. So whether that's traffic data in the CMDB or that process data that may connect different CIs. So machine learning algorithms are running all over that data in the CMDB, and it's generating connection suggestions for existing maps. And with this, you can either add or remove them from that map, either automatically or based upon your review. So we're using machine learning to tell you additional things that can be used to be added to your map, or you can even create new maps that you haven't yet started building. All right, let me take a quick pause before we get into our training path, and I'll look at the Q&A. Okay. Here we go. Is SSH mandatory to map load balancers? Is SSH mandatory to? That I am not sure. I know SSH is mandatory when you're discovering any of your Linux environment. I can take that as a takeaway and get back to you on that. So any of these questions that I'm not able to answer today, I'll get the answers and then I'll put them in kind of a PDF format so that everybody can see those. The next question, which approach is best to discover changes in the application as time evolves? Yeah, so Rick, we'll talk about service mapping, the application services discovery schedule. And that's really one of the steps that we highlight when configuring this, is making sure that we're going back and we're doing our due diligence to check if anything's changed in that service map over time. So I'm seeing a lots of questions. Okay. So I'm seeing a hierarchical setup. How is this done with tag mapping? With tag mapping, it's really however you want to define your tagging governance. I can show you when we get into the instance, I'll show you. There are quite a few more questions coming in, so I'm going to pause on these. Again, there's a lot of content to get through, so if I don't get to your questions today, I'll make sure that we get to them in the follow-up. So let's keep going for now. And we're going to look at the training that we suggest here. And so we do have some great training available if you and your teams, a lot of you are here just getting started with service mapping. And I highly recommend taking some form of training that ServiceNow offers. I've personally taken the self-led on-demand course and the instructor-led course. And both of these come with hands-on labs, and they're incredibly helpful. So if you have the time and you really want to deep dive service mapping, I would highly recommend one of these courses. So again, I'll make sure to send out the slide deck after today's call so you have all of these links. And then one other thing that we were including with all of the resources were some additional demo videos that further break down the various approaches. So today we're going to kind of cover them at a high level. And then in these videos, you'll see them broken out by top-down, tag, and machine learning a little bit further, if you're a little further along in your service mapping journey. So now's the fun part where we get into the configuration for each of these 3 approaches and then how it looks in my actual instance. So the first one we're going to talk through is top-down. So again, pattern and traffic. So the first step that we want to make sure here is that we want to make sure we have an active and valid mid server running and that we have our credentials set up so that we can actually run horizontal discovery. And this is so important because service mapping uses those configuration items and data within your CMDB to build out these maps. So once we have our CMDB populated, we're going to define an entry point. So for an example, maybe your service is an electronic mailing application service. We need to define either an IP address or a host name of that email server as that entry point. And we have a lot of options for entry points that I'll show you when we get into the instance. So if you have these services and entry points already tracked somewhere, maybe on a spreadsheet, you can also bulk upload these as well. And this kind of segues us into our third step, which is running top-down discovery. So basically, once an entry point is defined, top-down discovery automatically starts and it will look for that host CI in the CMDB. Maybe it was already there from a previous horizontal discovery, which would be great, but if not, it will automatically launch horizontal discovery to search for that specific CI across your network. And so once it identifies that host, it's then going to keep looking for any outbound connections from a pattern and traffic perspective. And it's going to keep looking for those outbound connections until it can't reach anything else. And then it's going to present you with its initial findings of that service map. And so after that process takes place, we need to review and approve our maps, which brings us to step 4, review and approve. So here's where we're going to work with your service owner to make that map operational. And then the last step is regularly running discovery to keep our maps current. And so that's kind of a quick high level. Let me stop sharing for just a minute and we'll switch over to my demo instance. Okay. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new application service. So I am first in my service mapping application services. And here is a long list of all the services. You can see I have 53 services mapped. So we're going to start here and we're going to click on new. And the service that I'm going to map is called Movieplex. And we need to give it an owner. So we're going to make Abel our owner here. And this is actually, our Movieplex is actually an Oracle WebLogic server. And I have 2 entry points for this particular service. So we can see right here, we'll put the entry points in as soon as we check, what type of entry point is it? And we have some out of the box ones right here. But if we click on other, the one that I have today is an HTTPS endpoint. And so we're going to, let me grab that link. So we're going to enter it here. And we can see that it came up over here. We're going to do that one more time because again, I have 2 entry points. And same thing, another HTTPS endpoint. Okay, and we're going to save this. And as soon as we save this map, what's going to happen is top-down discovery is already kicking off. So we'll be able to see this map in just a minute. But there are a couple other things that we want to set in here, and that is a business criticality. So to me, this one is less critical, but I still need to know about it. And we're going to keep this operational status as non-operational for right now. The other thing to point out right here is keeping this traffic-based discovery checked. And because this is a new application service, I want it to go out and discover as much as it can initially. So I'm going to wait on turning this off until this map is completely finalized with my business owner or with my service owner able, and we're happy with this one. We can also set any group members here. So for now, I'm just going to click update and then view map. And so what we have here is, as soon as this loads, is we're going to see a topology of those two entry points. There we go. And all the configuration items that this service comprises of. So it's gone out and it's found any of those outgoing connections from this entry point, and it treats those connections as if they themselves were new entry points. And it keeps running that same process that it did for that initial entry point for all of the other applications. And it just keeps looking for those outgoing connections and kind of crawling through to create this map. And as we hover over these, we can get more details here. And so when we get this map, the thing to point out is that we didn't really need to create any new CIs. We didn't have to create any new patterns. This, all of this was in our CMDB. But if we did, again, those would be options too, and we'll see how those can be done shortly. So the other part here to note is that we can always change our view to display in host view. And I think this can sometimes be helpful. The host view can help us determine that service mapping discovered and mapped all of our hosts correctly, as well as help locate those connections to the hosts. So this view kind of helps to simplify the map, especially when many applications are running on a few hosts. But for now, we're just going to turn it off. And the second thing to point out here is that under our send for review, this is where if I clicked this button, this would actually send Abel, our service owner, some information about this particular application service that we've mapped. You can write notes and collaborate back and forth. And so the other part that I want to do here is I actually want to make sure that, all right, I looked at this service map. It looks great to me. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to approve this map. And it's showing that it was successful. And if we go back into our application services and look for our Movieplex application, the thing to point out here is that the operational status was changed from non-operational to operational. All right. So that last part I saw, I think there were questions about how do we keep these maps updated now that we have this? This is so great, but I don't want to let it, I don't want to let it expire, or not really expire, but changes happen where I'm not actually discovering those. So we're going to go in, we want to keep all of these application services and service maps up to date as CIs are added and removed. And a great way to do this is by going into service mapping and discovery schedules. And it's very important. I'm going to go back. You can go into discovery schedules, both under service mapping and under discovery. So you want to make sure that you're in the service mapping section. And so out of the box by default, these are two pre-configured schedules that'll run top-down discovery. And so today we're going to look at all applications. There we go. And all application schedule is basically going to run top-down discovery if I have it active every day, or however you want to set this up. But we could turn it on to set every day or however you see fit. And that's really the best way to keep these maps up to date. So let's go back to the slides and we'll go into our next configuration for our for tag based. There we go. Okay, so similar to top-down service mapping, we still need to make sure that we have our mid server active and validated for our and our cloud discovery schedule is set up and running. And so this is going to be especially important for this because, again, like I mentioned, we're using our cloud and container discovery to pull in those attributes, which include all of that tag data. This is going to be the foundation for how we really set up these maps. And so once we have all of this data in our CMDB, we're going to define tag families. And you can think of these as tag categories. Think of these tag categories as like a glossary of how those tags are defined. So maybe your dev team uses the tag env, but that's for it, and that tag is for environment. And maybe another team also has environment. Maybe it's your IT team that's using environment, but they're using a different tag. And so here in these tag categories, we're going to cross-translate all of those terms and make sure that we're capturing all of those for that same, tag family. And then based on that data, defining how we want to map, we're going to look at that and it's going to automatically generate candidates for us to map. So we'll walk through all of that now. Give me just 1 second. And then the same things, running discovery to keep those schedules and maps, or keep those maps current. Give me 1 second. Okay. And so where we're going to start with cloud discovery is we want to look at that tag data being pulled in. So how I'm going to do that, I already have my mid server set up. I already have my cloud discovery running. So I'm going to go into my cloud resource dashboard. And the instance that I'm talking about, I'm in my AWS cloud environment. And we're going to look at one of my particular VM machines that I have running. And this one, we're going to search for it. And we can see I have an Emily Walker EC2 Windows VM. And when I click into here, this same view is the view that we get in our normal CMDB. So once I'm in here, I'm going to scroll all the way down and under all tag values, this is where so in my AWS environment, I found this VM, I assigned the tags, and then it also pulled in the tag values. And it's able to pull this data again and through a discovery pattern specifically set for AWS tagging. And we'll see that in just a minute. But what it's bringing in is it's bringing in the value for a name and for owner. And so this is really important as you're building out your tags with service mapping. So let's look really briefly at patterns. And so what we have here are a full list of all of that out of the box patterns that we have, and it's quite large. So the one that we're going to be looking at today is our Amazon AWS inventory tags. And we can see here, we can open this and look further in detail at it further here. And these should be added to your pattern library out of the box. But again, if you're not seeing a specific pattern that you need, you can always search our ServiceNow store for additional patterns. But we can see that this particular pattern, it's telling discovery how to go out and to look for those particular tag keys and values when we're scanning in our AWS environment, and how to naturally pull those in as part of the horizontal discovery process in the cloud. So let's go back now and look at all of the service maps that we have that are structured under the defined, the tag approach. So assuming that we have our tag data pulled in from discovery, we're going to head over here, which is under service mapping, and this is our tag-based services. So we're still in our service mapping module, but simply looking at our tag-based view here. And this is a list of all the particular services that I have mapped using tags. So let's go into this recommendation prod. And the name is a little funny on here, the way that this could initially look. So I'll talk about how this naming structure is defined in just a minute. And actually, let's go to view map. And this map looks really similar to the one that we just saw with top-down discovery. So we have an entry point and we can see our different configuration items that we have, but this is all based on tag data. And so I want to show you that how we actually create this using that tag data. So we're going to go back and we're going to delete this and we're going to start this one end to end. And you can see this brought me right back to my map application services. So we need to go back into our tag services. And from here, we're just going to delete. And yep, that is okay. Takes a couple of seconds here. Okay, so now that this is deleted, the first thing that I want to do is head over to service mapping to our CI tag categories and click into application service. So with CI tag categories, once we define the specific tag keys that we're going to be looking for and bringing in with discovery, we want to cross communicate all the tag keys that various teams could be using. Maybe they're using different terms to tag that same application service, like we kind of talked about with the example of environment. So we define all the variations in this tag category right here. And so once we have all the variations for this particular tag category name, then we're going to move over to tag families. And same thing, we're still under, let me find it. There we go. It's under service mapping, tag-based service families. And so here, we're going to first go into that same one, that application services. So here's where we're defining that mapping logic that's going to be used in that mapping process. And we can see here our tag categories for the application service and environment appear right here. So in this case, I'm telling it that I want to see a combination of the tag values for application services and the value for environment. So for this example, going back to that funky naming convention, it was recommendation : prod. If we go back and remember how that's named, it's a combination of these two tag categories. So recommendation being the application service and prod being the environment. So it's a concatenation of both of these. And so once we've defined our tag families, we can actually click on this view service candidates. And here we're given the automatic service candidates, and this is automatically populated based on that data that's being pulled into the CMDB. So this is giving me a recommended services to map. And we can see here that recommendation.prod that we recently deleted, along with a few others, again, pointing out how that name gets created. And so what we can do is we can actually click on it and click map selected. So this is giving me a recommended service to map, and we want to map this one. We want to go in and make sure that this one is built correctly. So if we go back to our tag-based, we see recommended prod down here, and we can also see that it's waiting for calculation. So we need to go in and recalculate this. And we can see that down here in the related links. And if we click on view map, we should have everything that we need the way it looked before I deleted it. And that is really tag mapping or tag-based mapping. So let's stop sharing. Let me jump back over to my slides and we will look at the last configuration for machine learning. All right. I think everybody can see that. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the configuration steps for machine learning. And really the first place you want to start here is making sure that you go into your system properties and verify that we have this connection suggestion property for set to active. And there's no need to, again, don't feel like you need to jot this down. I'll make sure that you get the slides after today's presentation. But double check this because within the last few releases, they've actually been setting this to inactive. So you'll have to go in and make sure it's active. And then the next part here is if you want those connection suggestions to be automatically added to your maps, based on those connection rules. Again, this points out that that this is completely optional here. You can have those connection suggestions turned on automatically, entirely up to you and your teams if you want that, or if you want to manually review those still. So after that, we want to make sure that we are reviewing the application fingerprint suggestions. And this is where these are what discovery is finding and thinking that you have in your environment that isn't yet mapped. And so we'll take a look at that and how application fingerprints really work. And then the last part, again, making sure that we're keeping our maps current by regularly running discovery. So let's go into our last demo. Okay. And so we are going to start in our mapped application services. So I'll go back up here. And we're specifically going to be looking for a mapped application called Trex. There we go. And we can see it right here. And we're going to click on View Map. And for this one, I do see that I have a mid-server issue. I already knew that this was going to appear. I like to play around in my test environment and see what I can break and see what I can fix. So this is completely expected and that's fine. But where I want us to focus on is up here under suggestions and specifically under connection suggestions. So we see this again because I have that connection suggestions property in my system preferences turned to active. And I actually have this pulled up right here. So if you're in your system properties, you can look for this machine learning connection suggestions and make sure that it's set to true. Okay, let's go back. So let's click into this connection suggestion that the machine learning is proposing. And another thing to point out here is that I don't have the optional automatic connections added to my maps. I personally like to review what the system is proposing first and then, approving or rejecting it. So just to iterate how machine learning is working here, it's saying we think that there's a CI that is relevant to this particular service map that you have, and we think that it should be added here. So how it's generating these connection suggestions is by machine learning algorithms that are running over all of that collected, that traffic data, the application fingerprints. It's looking at that process data that might be connecting different CIs. And it's basically feeding that predictive intelligence trainer to make these recommendations. So we can see here all of these recommendations, these connection suggestions that we have. We have a CI, we have where it's talking to, we have the target host, and then most importantly over here, we have this confidence level and the decision that has been decided for this particular suggestion. For this one, we have a confidence level of high and we have an undecided one. So we can actually click on one of these, and down at the bottom, we have the option to either add or exclude. Let's go back now and let's spend a few minutes talking about application fingerprints. And so I just went into my discovery home. This is the one where it does switch. Most of the time we've been working in our service mapping module, but for this one, we're going to switch over to our discovery home and we're going to look at our application fingerprints. And so right away, looks like I have a lot of work to do. I have 621 suggestions for application fingerprinting. And so I'm just going to click on view suggestions. And then I want to look at all suggested applications. And when we're looking at the map, when we were looking at that map from the previous step, from that mapped application services and that connection suggestions, that was just giving us suggestions for additional CIs that we may want to add to that specific map, those existing maps. But here, we're kind of taking a step backwards, and machine learning is suggesting entirely new application suggestions that I don't have mapped in my environment yet. So based on the discovery data that's being collected, it thinks it thinks that there is an entire application that exists in this environment, in my environment, that I may want to go ahead and map. So that's what it's really telling us here. And this is really, you know, how does this really help you and your teams? Well, I think, you know, this is really helpful for teams that have homegrown applications. And this is really the case because Discovery has prerequisites for pulling in applications. And those are that the CMDB class, it has to have that CMDB class so it can put that data into the CMDB. It needs that pattern to tell it what attributes to specify. And then it needs a process classifier to say that this particular process that's running actually belongs to this particular application. And so for things that are more common, like that first demo that we did with the Oracle, that was out of the box. I showed you that pattern list where we had about 900 out of the box patterns. But for some of our homegrown applications, building those patterns can take time. You absolutely can build patterns, and I think we have a whole course on that, but that can also be really time consuming. So this is where application fingerprinting can really help. And so let's look at an example of this. So I'm going to filter this and only see suggested group name with Trex. And the one I want to look for is Trex filter. And so let's say that this is a homegrown application and I don't have this mapped yet, but the system sees it. And so it's automatically going to create those prerequisites here. So if I open this up, we see that process name. We see the discovery pattern name and the suggested CMDB CI class, as well as it also created a suggested classifier right there. And this was to help classify that process. And so from here, we have the option to discover if this is a relevant application that we know we have in our environment. And if we felt like this was a relevant one that we wanted to go ahead and have Discovery map, we could click on Discover Application. But that is really it for using machine learning. So let me stop. We have a lot of questions that have come in. So I think we'll have a few minutes at the end to get to some of those. But again, if we don't, I will get all of these answered for everyone and share them out with all of this great content. Okay, so the key takeaways today, again, we really looked at the value of service mapping and how it can really help to help your teams get a full idea of what you have, what business services you have. We looked at the 3 approaches top down, which includes pattern and traffic-based service mapping, tag-based service mapping, and machine learning. And then we looked at best practices and skills needed to implement service mapping. On this next slide, I have a few additional resources that will be really helpful, and you'll get these when we send this out here, but some videos on what's new, a little bit more information on tag-based and machine learning service mapping. There's some product documentation, and additionally, you'll get those 3 videos that have a little bit of a deeper dive on the 3 different approaches. All right, I do have one closing poll, but I think let's do that here in just a minute. Let's kind of go through some of the Q&A here. I'll go through the first one. So how long will this type of process take to complete? Yeah, good question. So it really varies on which method you're choosing. Again, we kind of talked about top down taking, the most time. And that's really because, again, you need credentials, you need user permissions, you need all of these things. And so that can take some time. I think that's ultimately the hardest part. But if you already have discovery, you kind of have already started that process to get those credentials. And so this isn't anything new to your organization. Tag-based is really effective and really quick for cloud discovery. You can also use tags for traditional, you can give configuration items tags within your CMDB. However, when you map it, that data becomes flat, and then you have to set up traverse rules so that, this tag-based method really works the best for your cloud and container infrastructure. And then machine learning is really great. If you've put a few of these in with the top-down method and you want to give machine learning a try, there's a really great, you can kind of pick and choose how you want to do this and then work with that service owner before you put these maps into an operational state. So it really varies. That didn't really answer your question, other than actually the one that we did in the demo for Movieplex. All of those items I had in my CMDB, and that mapped within minutes. So I think that kind of gives you a good idea. Okay, next one. I'm curious how customers determine which CI class to allow for selection from an instant CR problem form. We have already over 1 million CIs through various discoveries and service mapping. We'll add much more. We don't want individuals to wade through even millions of CIs. Do customers somehow limit the CI classes available to make these forms work easier? Good question. That I honestly don't know. Mike, I saw you join. Mike is one of our other ITOM specialists on my team. If we can't answer this, Steve, happy to get some more information for you. I know it can be a little daunting when we have such a large CMDB here.
I unfortunately can't see the question. It was, I think, before I joined.
Oh, no worries. Okay, yeah, Steve, we'll get back to you on that one. Okay, yep, another question came in about tag-based mapping, it being best suited for your cloud services, but are instances where it's beneficial to use it for on-prem services. Exactly what I was just talking about. You can go in and add that key pair value into any CI, and then create a tag based on, and then map that based upon those tags. Just creating the the tag CI categories and the tag families. The only caveat to that is that it kind of creates this flat map where you're not really seeing the different layers. So that's one thing. I'm not sure if we have any product documentation on that, but I will try to find some and put it in here. Next question. Is there a guide to specify what CI classification should be used in core ITSM to take advantage of service maps? Is there a guide to specify what CI classification should be used within core to take advantage of service maps? Evan, I want to say for that one, we're probably going to refer you back to the common service data model. So I'll send some stuff on that, but I have a feeling that that's where that would be outlined, that's where that's the guide that you would want to use on how to standardize that data model. Okay, next one. I think we can probably do 1 or 2 more, and then I'll close you out with a quick poll and send you on your way for today. So the next one, what is the best way to troubleshoot top-down discovery? We often don't get connections added to a service map, and even though there are TCP connections for that CI, we don't get connections. Yeah, so Brent, for this one, the best way would be through the discovery log, and you can actually pull up the discovery log. You can click into, let me actually go back and I'll show you this because this is a really handy one. And this is actually outlined in one of the videos that I'll be sending out. So if we go into our mapped application service, I have one that I know I had errors on. Let me find it. Here we go. This is one that I'm currently building out. And so you can right click on any of these configuration items and show the discovery log. And from here, it will show you where it errors. This error is completely fine. This is moving through various patterns until it gets to a pattern that it actually, that's actually relevant for this one. But the discovery log is probably your best bet for being able to troubleshoot. For tag-based mapping, your slide says tag governance is required. Does that mean tag governance module needs to be installed? No, it does not. If for clarity, ITOM has 3 products. So visibility, which includes discovery and service mapping, ITOM Health, which has event management, health log analytics, and then we have a separate one ITOM optimization. That is our cloud provisioning and governance. That's where we're able to provide governance around those tags from a ServiceNow perspective. But no, Robert, you can have your own governance program that's running at your organization. Next question, can you provide recommended specs for the mid-server for service mapping? Susan, I will make sure to send out our mid-server sizing guide or best practice guide that has a lot of those questions in there. And again, thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you found this beneficial. And again, if you have any other questions that you didn't get to put in the Q&A or the chat, I will, if you want to just shoot me an email, happy to help. Again, it's emily.walker@servicenow.com. And I thank you so much for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day.